So, Ricardo, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us about incidents, site reliability. You've been writing a lot about this lately as
hmm
well, and I also see that you were just in London at SRE Day. How was it? Would you speak about there?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a trip back to a place that I used to call home a few years ago. So it was quite nice. So SRE Day, I think they're still starting. So it was their second edition. So it's still relatively small. So we still feel that coziness of there's not so many people not going like a AWS reInvent or a KubeCon
Totally.
where like thousands of people. So you still feel that thing of you can possibly know everyone, but there's still a
Yeah.
lot of room just to sit down with people and have conversation. And I was there to talk a little bit about a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about SRE anti-patterns and what I personally have failed in my SRE DevOps journey and what I see other people failing or struggling with. And more specifically, I was talking about the what I usually call the rebranding of the operations team, where a lot of our organizations just okay now you guys the ops team are called DevOps or SRE go, and nothing else really
Yeah, it
significant
doesn't.
changes,
Yeah.
and then the organization gets surprised. Oh, so now you guys are SRE and we didn't get better. Yeah, that's not really how it works, right?
Shocking, right? Yeah,
Shocking,
yeah.
actually.
That happened to me as well. Actually, I was DevOps, and then one day I was an SRE, and I was like, so
Yeah,
my
yeah.
title changed, my pay didn't, my and I've definitely seen that. So that's great. And I we've known the folks that run the SRE day for a few years. We've been on
Mhm.
a couple of their media outlets, and they're a great crew. So it looked like it
Absolutely.
was like a perfect size to fit in a pub after the
Yeah,
conference was. Yeah.
absolutely. It's still at that type of size, so not everyone goes to the pub afterwards, but it's we can still all fit more or less inside a pub, which is great. You have
Yeah.
the opportunity to talk with a lot of people, and they brought really interesting speakers, so it got also was awesome in that regard.
Yeah, that's great. Well, but we just kind of jumped into what did you do recently, but let's
Yeah,
let's go
sure.
back even further, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, your experience as an SRE,
Mhm.
and how'd you even get into this path?
Yeah, sure. So I started in college. I was a researcher in college, and for almost a year I dabbled into a PhD. So I was doing research, but I found out that this is not really my thing. So
Sure.
I'll go to the industry, and this was more than a decade ago. I started. We didn't. There was a clear sysadmin versus product engineers or whatever it was called at the time, software engineers, and then eventually actually happened when I was, let me step back. I was always fortunate, and I can now say that with confidence, that I never experienced a lot of that ops versus dev, because all of the roles that I had until I had an official DevOps role, I still had some concerns about how to run stuff in production. So
Mhm.
I have to be honest, I never suffered a lot of that thing of, oh, I just wrote this code. Now the sysadmins deal with it in production. I
Right.
always had some
You had
kind of
some skin in the
operational,
game. You some
some skin in the game.
responsibility. Yeah.
Exactly. I held the same skin. But again, I was in London. I worked for a couple of companies, and one of them we outsourced a lot of work.
Mhm.
So we were a small technology team within very big company. So we couldn't possibly do everything that a company needed us to do, and a lot of work was very repetitive. So we outsourced a lot of work, but that meant that they had to run their stuff on our infrastructure, on our services. So we were like launching websites and doing the same thing over and over again. So we were like, okay, we're software engineers. Why don't we start to automate this stuff? CI/CDs and creating infrastructure and whatnot. And that led me to a more operational role in terms of, okay, let's start to automate all this kind of stuff. When I got back to Portugal was when I got my first ops related title as a DevOps engineer. I never really got used to the title because it sounds weird to me, but it is what it is. It's what the industry started to adopt. And then suddenly in 2016, I read the SRE book. I got really confused because there's so much stuff in there. I was like, I don't even know where to start. But it spiked a little bit more my interest, and it resonated with me in regards of the okay. So how do it was always a struggle. Like I need to make my system reliable. Okay, but how do I actually define that? How do I measure that? and all the SLO kind of stuff actually stuck with me in terms of, okay, so now I have some kind of a framework where I can actually say, okay, this, when I say reliable, this is what I really mean, and I can measure that at sense and whatnot. And some of the stuff in there resonated with me, and the company starting to adopt the SRE role, not the mindset or the practices, the role. And for a few years now, my official title has been around SRE. And lately, because I entered the new challenge roughly a year ago, where we were given a lot of freedom and liberty to say, okay, we do have stuff that we want to improve. You guys are the SREs, help us out. I've been thinking a lot, trying to not make the same mistakes I've done in the past, trying to learn from others. That's why you said that I've been writing a lot. It's basically me reasoning about stuff and talking with people, trying to also get their feedback in terms of, am I thinking right? Am I missing something? It's around that.
Yeah, and I think that you're you're striking a chord with folks, right? Because I think that what you just said is the experience of a lot of people. Even right before we were chatting, like that was my experience. I was a DevOps engineer where I worked on building the CI pipelines, making sure we could roll back bad changes really easily, building the systems that would alert correctly, not be very noisy. But and that was before I had the SRE title, and then I switched to the SRE title, and I still wasn't really building software that encouraged better reliability, which is kind of like I'm more of a purist of like that name. So what are some of those challenges that you've had? I mean, you've talked about some of the anti patterns, but high stress seems to be something that is an aspect of being an SRE. You're constantly on call. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on like the mental and physical health part of the SRE portion of the role.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we were talking previously, so I do still see a lot of a lot of organizations just like adopting the SRE title or brand without that much change. Maybe they change a tool or something like that, but everything keeps very similar to what it was before. So if the situation was stressful in terms of on call and in terms of operations, it will keep being stressful, right? Because you didn't really change, you didn't look at the problem, and even looking at SRE and trying to figure out like what is SRE, why was it brought to life, like why did Google in 2003, like what were the problems that they were facing? Is this really the path that I want to go? And I think a lot of organizations struggle with that, and SREs end up having like a bad time, both physically and mentally, in terms of on call, for example. What we were discussing about is because they don't really understand what they mean when they talk about SRE. They keep the same processes, and then for a lot of the organizations, it's my experience that they believe that the SREs will be there to fix something, right? You guys are the reliability people, so it's on you to, if you have a problem, to fix it. It's on you to figure out what's wrong. It's on you to actually have the proper alert. And it's not like, it's like when we talk about security and whatnot, it's, of course we have security teams, but it's on all of us to have a part in that process. And of course SREs are big responsible for that, but it's not the SRE. And it's also an anti-pattern that I talk about a little bit, which is the anti-pattern of the SRE hero, where some teams fall into, where they are the heroes. They are the ones who fix everything. They are the ones who block everyone because, oh, you're going to mess with my system, you're going to bring everything down, you're going to bring change and whatnot. So I do think that a lot of organizations fall into that trap of, okay, we have an SRE team, it's on them to make sure that everything is working. And then, of course, on-call rotations, being on call, something breaks, you're always brought into an on-call session. Okay, what hell happened? And I think that some organizations struggle a little bit, and of course, the human side is very painful for SREs that are on call.
Yeah, it's almost like the S in SRE stands for stress, and it gets
fair
a lot harder and harder the more the site goes down. Like you're just constantly fighting, and it's a lot of organizations I see, they treat their SREs as kind of like the fire department instead of the fire code, where the SREs are kind of building software, building processes that say this is what reliable software is for the rest of the team, and building the tools that empower those organizations to have more reliable software. if your team is doing more firefighting than doing like the actual like
Yep.
putting out the fires, you're probably not an SRE team. You kind of have
Yep.
to cross
Absolutely.
the threshold of 50% of the time
Yep.
you're building software. I think that's when you gradient into that SRE title.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So SRE
and
teams need that space and that time to actually build whatever tools, platforms, processes, so that you don't. Again, I know that the 50% comes from the SRE book, and we all know that even inside Google it will be different. But that at least we have some kind of a guidance. Okay, if we reach a certain threshold, something is wrong, right? We're not doing a good job because we're just allowing for the SRE team to be always firefighting. So they don't have the tool to actually, they don't have the time to actually build the tools, participate in architecture reviews, or talk with the teams. How are you going to mitigate this or that situation? So I completely agree with what you just said.
yeah, and one of the things with SREs is that the skill set needed to do this work is very broad. It's
Yep.
like it is. You have to understand networking. You have to understand, how processes run and start on machines, and you need to understand the actual software running on the machine. There's this kind of insane skill set needed
Yep.
for the SRE title. And this kind of affects their ability to specialize and achieve a deeper experience in a specific area. So, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Like, what's your take here?
Yeah. So as most of the questions that you ask in tech and in general, you will get the "it depends" answer, right?
Yeah,
So
the
this
senior
this one,
engineer
yeah, yeah,
response. Yeah,
this is not an exception. But yeah, you're absolutely on point there. So what we try to do for this in our teams is to have a broad skill set in the team, all but allowing certain parts of the teams to specialize in certain areas, right? So that precisely we don't have like everyone the same skill set, but no one is very deep in something, and we try to have a diverse mindset in the team. But that's the problem. If you have an engineer on call, and especially if it's SRE, people look at it. Oh, this is the person who actually will knows like I don't know, networking, how Linux works. It knows how the
sure.
API works. It knows how Java or the JVM works. It's like, yeah, I can't possibly know all those things in very deep, right? Because it's so much stuff. Like I could specialize only in Linux and how Linux internal works, how the kernel works to actually know all these things, or networking, or whatever it is. But it is a struggle, and I think that it will depend on the type of organization that you will have. In some organizations, you will need to be more high level and have a broad understanding. It will be more architectural. How do we architect systems? On other organizations, you will probably be a little bit more focused on certain aspects and making sure that thing actually works. That the thing that you really need to focus on. I don't think we will ever reach a point that will be a one size fits all, where we can actually say, okay, this is the exact skill set that an SRE needs to have. Most of the times it will be somewhat broad, but in some teams or some people will have a deeper knowledge about a specific set of tools and practices. But yeah, no SRE will be just focus on something. That you will have to have like a broader understanding and to contribute to a lot of these things.
Right. And it kind of I think that lends to the fact of the rise of service ownership, right? It's these systems are getting more complex. The SREs or DevOps teams, operation sysadmins, they were traditionally the fire department. They would kind of work on the operational issues and unexpected downtime of these systems, but at a certain point it breaks. It just, the systems have become too complex that those teams can't run the services by themselves anymore. You have to have the application engineers on call too. Uh, I think that's my take. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I've always been a fan of the you build it, you run it, in terms of,
yeah,
okay, you're the best. So you built this service, you know how that works, you have the business knowledge domain of how this is supposed to work. If I'm the person running it in production, I don't, probably in terms of business, I don't even actually know if this is behaving as it's supposed to.
right.
So I'm totally on what I was. I know more sympathetic with the you build it, you own it, because it's not only runs like you own the whole thing, but these things will go hand in hand. I think we've tried this multiple times in the past of this throwing over the wall. Yeah, you build the code, this guy runs it, it has a problem. You say, okay, I'm seeing the process, it's running, like the VM is running, so back to you. So this back and forth, I think these
Yeah.
teams need to work together. But again, everyone needs to be, let's put it, everyone needs to be on call because it's a shared responsibility. At the end of the day, this needs to be a shared responsibility. I might own and build and own like the platform. I don't know, maybe I build like the CI/CD pipelines and I own the Kubernetes clusters where you run your workloads, but then you own like product services. So we need to work together to actually make this successful.
Yeah, 1,000%. That I think that's how you build the best software for sure.
Absolutely.
So there's something that there's something I want an opinion on here because
Mm.
we're talking about building software, constantly launching it, constantly keeping it running, hopefully not constantly firefighting, and it was something of the effect of like a treadmill, right, an operational treadmill. And I'm curious, like, I think you have opinions on what the concept of an operational treadmill is, and I'm hoping you could explain that to me. um, and how does that kind of affect the SRE's ability to work on these long-term projects and more strategic initiatives?
Yeah. So I usually see SRE teams in most when I speak with people at conferences or at meetups, they are usually dividing themselves into two types of teams. Some will be more operational and support to teams. So let's say that you have an SRE team and you have like five divisions in your company that deal with different stuff, and you have like dedicated SREs for the I don't know checkout process because it has a lot of stuff for the blah 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 stuff, and they are a
Yeah.
lot operational in terms of dealing with those engineers themselves. The other side, and we've been seeing this in the last couple of years with the rise of the platform engineering movement. They will be
Yes.
more on the platform side of things. There will be more on, okay, so I build some tooling, some kind of platform, and then it's on you to actually do that kind of stuff, do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I've been seeing, and we've been dabbling with that a little bit, or having SRE teams a little bit more on the strategic, but kind of like looking at the bigger landscape, understanding how some pieces fit together, especially in big organizations where you have, I don't know, we have thousands of engineers, we have God knows how many services, and we have stuff that just flows from area that someone's developing in Europe to the US, and you do need that higher level overview. Say, okay, some processes is failing, and everyone on their own island says, oh, seems to be working on my side, and you need that vision on the other side. Oh, probably the problem is between this and that, or something like that. So I see that division, or mostly that division between more people, more operationally, more focused on specific areas, and more strategic, call it platform level kind of teams. I do think that the people that are closer to the teams suffer a little bit more of that operational treadmill because they are suffering side by side with the teams of the pains that they are dealing with, and okay, and they share the same problems, they have the same issues. While on the other side, and this is something that I also have a strong opinion on, with we do have some teams that are platform teams that don't treat the platform as a product, and they're like, okay, I decide what the problem, what the
Mm,
platform is, and this is how you should do things. And unfortunately, I've seen this more than once where they just build something, they arrive to the teams and they say, okay, that doesn't actually solve my problem. I have like this 10 other problems that you could be working on, right?
right.
And it's like, okay, so they suffer a little bit. So I'm very fond of the dog fooding concept where you build a platform, but you use the platform that you built. So
Yep.
you are to get you closer to the team so that, okay, if they have a problem, I have a problem, so we're sharing the same pain. So it's much easier for me to solve my problem, and by I will solve their problem and whatnot. But I think I'm seeing a lot of that. And although some organizations or some platform teams still don't treat their platform as a product where their clients are other engineers, that should be the way that they should move to.
Yeah. I think I like how I love the concept of the platform engineering role, but I think it's
Yeah,
challenging. I think it requires a lot of really strong communication between
absolutely.
the application teams, the SRE teams. Um, and I doubt you have trailer parks in Portugal. Maybe you do.
Yeah.
But like, I think of them as kind of like I should be able to like drive my trailer up
Hmm.
to a campsite and plug in everything, and all of the
Yep.
utilities, the plumbing, everything is just maintained and built for me. All I have to do is plug in. Like, that's kind of
Yep.
how I think of a platform team.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
and and if I want to change out my trailer, I don't know, this analogy is going off the rails, and maybe it
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
the podcast, I don't
I'm
know.
getting your point. I'm getting your
But
point.
and then the SRE teams are kind of responsible for helping make sure that that area stays clean and works
Yep.
constantly and it doesn't catch on fire.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So
I do
so
see. I do
I like that.
some. I do. Yeah, sorry. I do see that some struggle with that when, especially in a team in organizations where they have software that has been built a long time ago, and it had actually it doesn't have to be that long. It could be like 10 years ago, so not that long, where you do have a certain way of doing things, right, and the way that you deploy code, and even if you have some automation and whatnot, and you get a platform team, you're like, oh, okay, so we'll build everything will be cloud native, everything will be Kubernetes, everything will be containers and GitOps and whatnot, and people will be like, okay, let's take a step back because we do have a bunch of services that if the only transition path is going from here to there, like in one step, we'll be like rewriting our services for the next 18 months, and we have no transition path. So that's why, and this is just to emphasize the point that you said that there needs to be a lot of communication about these teams. It should be there should be like a clear path of say, okay, I arrive at the trailer park and I know that just plug something here, it's done, and stuff works.
Just
So
works. Yep.
yeah, it just works. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things is like designing interfaces and everything. So
yeah,
I love thinking about like how do we make software that meshes really quickly. I do think you have to dog food as well. I think that kind of reinforces that process, and we're building and releasing an alerting feature in the winter, and
hmm,
our internal release that we're using is called dog food. So it's literally like that's the process name.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so
absolutely.
we're aligned on names even. Um, so thinking about the role of SRE, there's something that I talked to folks in passing and at pubs and conferences, and you know there seems to be like, what is the career progression of an SRE? It feels um, it feels a little ill defined to me, and maybe even like the role is it could be considered ill defined, I would say. But what are some of the challenges that folks are going to face advancing their careers, and what are some of the strategies that they can consider and employ to overcome those?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I think it starts with the role not being clear, especially across the industry. I think that's probably you can speak with 10 different people from 10 different organizations, and you will probably get a somewhat different definition of what SRE means in their organization. So even transitioning from my organization to your organization, it could be like a challenge to an SRE here does this, this, and that, but in your organization does something completely different. So I think that hinders a little bit the how do we as an industry have an understanding of what is a senior SRE, what is a I don't know a principal SRE. I think it makes it a lot harder to have those kinds of conversations. But like we were talking previously, SREs in most parts are like a jack of all trades, so that makes it even harder. So is it like more technical skills? So how important are the communication skills for an SRE? For I think they're very important because you do have to speak with a lot of teams and a lot of conversations. But it will again, it will depend on the organization. The way that we are trying to approach this is to have like again, what does it mean for us? And then we are somewhat in the hybrid between a software engineer and an operations more type of role, and
Mhm.
we're trying to get some criteria. We're still doing that. Like it's not easy, but
Yeah.
that's how we're trying to approach. It's okay. So what are the things that we are going to attack? What are the challenges that we are going to solve? What is the skill set that we are going to require for this job. But it will be different from organization to organization. But it makes hard to make it consistent. If it's not easy to in areas where we have like a historical like software engineer we've been having for decades, even that it's not. What's the difference between a staff engineer and a principal engineer? You will get
Right.
like a hundred different
Yeah, it's not going to be
answers,
any
right?
different.
It's not going to be any different. I think SRE makes it hard. But the fact that because it's very poorly defined between companies, and the fact that in many companies it's a jack of all trades and it varies a lot, it makes it even harder. The way that we are trying to approach it is okay. What is the things that we'll need to tackle? What are we trying to achieve? And have that clear vision and high level strategy of what we want to do, and then try to bring people on board, either that they have some of the skill set that we want or that are willing to go that path, and then just trying to structure that as a normal software engineer role. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is what I expect of you from at the junior level, at a mid level, senior, principal, and whatnot.
Yeah, it's not like you can measure an SRE by the number of fires that they put out. Like that's not it.
Yeah,
And if that's
that's
all
not.
you're
Yeah,
doing as an SRE,
yeah,
if 80% of your role, 90% of your role is incidents and managing those, you don't really have an opportunity to sharpen the knife because you're just constantly
absolutely.
doing this other important work, but not really defined for the role. It's not a healthy
Yep, absolutely.
division. Um, and I think that you're totally right on the leveling of SREs is hard
Yeah,
as well. Um, I can only measure your knowledge so much, right?
yep, absolutely.
And what you produce and the outcomes of SRE is sometimes so opaque that
Yeah.
it can be challenging.
Yeah, and
So
if you have a team, for example, if you have a team and you have people on call, and I don't know, maybe someone was like last month was a lot more involved in on call, and there were a lot of incidents, right? And it didn't have the opportunity to write so much code. And you have someone else on the team that actually had the opportunity because they weren't on call. He produced a lot of code or automation, built an API or something like that. How do you even compare between they probably both of those people contribute a lot, but it's hard to make that comparison between
so
they
hard to see it.
contributed a lot. It's very, very, very hard.
Yeah, totally. Um, so let's start lining up for a landing here. Let's think about the future of SRE. We've talked about that this is a stressful job. You need to know a lot. There's an operational treadmill. The career progression can be a little hard. I mean, anyone listening to this might go, "Why the hell would I ever be an SRE?" So let's talk about the future here.
Yeah.
What do you see? How is it going to evolve? What are the opportunities, challenges, like coming years?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think we could have a tech podcast without talking about AI, right? And how the AI will transform and make all of us obsolete. But I think AIs and all this revolution that is unfolding every single day, I think it will also have an impact on SREs as well. We are already seeing some projects were like, okay, if you give me all of your observability data, I can automatically infer what could be like good SLAs because I have like the whole of your historical context, all of your logs, all of your metrics, so I can start to figure it out on my own what could be a good SLO for your service, for example. So I think AI, like in many areas in tech, will have a big impact. I think we are already seeing some of that, a bigger shift in many organizations to a more platform engineering kind of mindset. I still struggle a little bit with the concept because if I'm being fair with myself, I've always been a platform engineer because I've always, ever since I got into this more operational side of more operational role, I've always built some form of platform or tooling for teams to actually be as independent as possible. But I think we're seeing a bigger shift to that side instead of having like a DevOps team that they are like the gatekeepers. That still happens a lot, unfortunately. The gatekeepers of the infrastructure or something like that. And if you have to do something, you have to go through us. It's stuff. Okay, we need to make more things more. Even more, we hear a lot about self-service, but I think that will get more and more emphasized in the future. So those are two of the big trends that I'm seeing. And the last one is something that the SRE book talks about, but I think most SREs still fail, is about having that customer focus. When you talk about SRE, it's like, okay, the way that you define reliability, even if you could be using SLOs or whatever framework that you want, doesn't really matter. But having like what it means to be reliable is, you have users, you have customers, like it's on their eyes. It's like what they perceive from your platform. And I still think that a lot of these SRE teams that we have nowadays still focus a lot on the technical details. And I'm the one who says what good latency is or isn't, or what it means to be reliable or not. And I think it will be a greater focus on on that part of, okay, what is the user interested in. And I think that will be even exacerbated because we're getting the world moves the world moves so
Like that
fast
car.
that yeah, that car that just passed by.
Yeah.
The world moves so fast that if you're not listening to your users, you're not assessing if they are happy or not with your platform, you're probably losing customers and you don't even know
Right.
it.
I 100% agree. And I don't know if you've read or listened to this podcast in the past, but that is exactly what I say. I say that you could define your reliability in SLOs all damn day. It doesn't matter if the customer doesn't think you're reliable.
Exactly, exactly.
If you're slow, and someone, you know, writes into support and says, "Hey, your site is unreliable right now," and you point at a dashboard and say, "Yes, it is," they're not going to be happy with you. They're going to be pretty annoyed.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I love what you're saying.
Yeah, I was speaking with a friend who's working at another company. We're talking about this. They are starting to dabble a little bit with SLOs, and I was like, okay, we defined a bunch of SLOs, and I asked, yeah, what does your product team think, or whoever, the way that you organize, you have product in POs on the teams, and they were like, what do they think about this? And they were like, oh, we haven't spoken with them, and I was like, probably they
Huh.
are the best representative that you have on your teams of what the customer thinks. So have a chat with them. They'll probably have a
Right.
few ideas on that.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I also think that, you know, kind of going back to the very beginning of this topic, we were talking about being on call and how that could be part of the high stress. I think that when you start to align your on call rotation to your customers' expectations, that is just going to make a healthier balance for
Yep,
everyone.
absolutely, absolutely.
So we work with a major sports company, and they only alert people for certain incidents if there's a game on.
Yep,
They turn off all alerts the moment that there's no live games. And I thought that was so genius because, you know, maybe a streaming service is a little delayed right now, but it's
yep,
2 a.m. and there's no game on. So the
yep,
impact
yep,
to customers is, yeah, a little low. It's lower. So,
yep.
you know, align that to your
Yeah,
teams as well.
yeah. We've been working a lot of making our on-call experience better for our engineers. We still have a long way to go, but our mecca will be that is right. Okay, we do have some way of actually understanding if our users are being impacted or on the verge of being impacted, especially when we have big events, and that's one what I think why I think like SLOs shouldn't be static, because again, I work in the sports betting world. So does it really matter when there's nothing going on if the latency spiked a little bit? So it doesn't really, right? So we don't really have users doing anything. So if it spiked, I don't know, 10 or 20%, I don't want to wake up.
Yeah.
Especially because we are a global company, and even if we operate a lot in one geography, we do have engineers on the other side of the world. So what might be 5 in the afternoon for someone will be like 3 in the morning for someone else. So that's the way that we want to go. We want to reach a point where we say, okay, forget the alerts that you had logged. Now we have like a comprehensive set of alerts that we are confident that track user satisfaction, and we only want to alert you if one, the user is actually being impacted, and two, it's actually relevant. So there's, I don't know, football is not, there's no betting activity on the site, so why should I wake you up because
Yeah.
two users like spiked the latency or something like that? It doesn't really make sense.
I think that's a good future for us to all aim at here, especially
Yeah,
folks
yeah,
that are
yeah.
on call.
Yeah, I work a lot with directors, and I try to sell them this vision, and they're on board, right? They're on board.
Yeah.
But then you have engineers that are like on the trenches, and we're like, oh, that will be great, but we still have a long way to go. Yeah, but you also need that vision, right? You also need to, okay, this is what we aspire to, so let's work on to achieve that vision.
Right. Well, what a fun conversation. I mean, I came in here. We are talking about um, DevOps and how the transition to SRE. We're talking about, is platform going to take over SRE? Talking about, I mean, like, what a fun conversation.
Mhm.
So I hope that, I mean, I learned a lot, and I appreciate you coming on and talking about all these topics with us. So, if how can people reach you if they want to know more?
Sure. So I do have a personal website that I'm going to revamp at the end of this year. So if people want to reach me either on Twitter or on LinkedIn, I regularly go to those platforms. So I also always tell at conference or meetups. So just send me a message. It might take me a day or two, but I'm not like a famous person, so I don't receive like thousands of messages every day. So I eventually get back to
Soon.
people. So yeah, soon enough I'll get back to you. So if you need help, I've helped people with technical problems. Even like a lot of people's like, oh, I want to get into SRE. What course should I do? And I'm like, okay, let's try and figure it out. Where
Right.
you gonna go? So I can give you a pointer to like my path. Probably maybe it will be different for you, but just either like Ricardo Castro on LinkedIn or MCC Ricardo on Twitter. Just feel free to drop me a DM or send me a message.
That's awesome. Well, Ricardo, thanks so much. And I hope you have a lovely day and weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having. I was already a fan of the podcast, or I listen to it regularly. So it was a pleasure having a conversation with you guys, and thank you very much for inviting me.
That was awesome. Thank you. That was
Awesome.
that was